Hello and welcome. Today's special episode is on how hurricanes affect marine construction and the industry as a whole. And I had a viewer ask me that specific question and ask if I could do an episode regarding that. So here I am. I have no script for this episode. I'm just going to share my past experiences, my family's history, on how and myself how we prepare for a pending storm and what happens before, during, and after, and how it affects the industry from my point of view. So I've been through. I'm based in Florida. I've been through every hurricane and tropical storm or storm system that has impacted Florida since 1969. There were three hurricanes that really stick in my head, and one especially that affected family business, and I'll go over those things with you. But first, some basic things on how hurricanes affect the marine construction business is they affect it both financially, both positive and negative. They affect the supply chain. They affect fuel, the ability to obtain fuel, materials. They affect the mentality, I guess I'd say, of the company as a whole, meaning from ownership to employees, because, most of your employees are going to be around your home base, the home base of your business, meaning the town that your business is in. And so if we have a storm hit, that affects your entire company, So I'm going to go over the hurricanes first, and then I will go through how we prepared, and I'll go through during the storm and the recovery process after the storm, just to give you an idea of how storms, hurricanes impact or affect marine construction. So the first storm that really impacted our business was Hurricane Charley. Hurricane Charley was a small, compact, powerful storm. And where our home base was at the time in Punta Gorda, Florida, Charley Punta Gorda took a direct hit, and it devastated the place. We had a shop up there on 2.5 acres, I believe, and an office was at a different location, but in the same town. And we had a 80-foot by 40-foot pole barn with steel columns and massive footers. And I remember, the first thing I remember, once we were able to go assess the damage, at the time I lived about 25 miles south of Punta Gorda. And so me and my father, a day or two later, we were able to go and assess the damage of the equipment, the projects, and the office and shop. And I remember when we pulled up to the shop, that there was no shop. And the columns and the footers were ripped out of the ground on the pole barn, I call. And it sent it about a quarter mile down the street into the Coca-Cola plant, and which the Coca-Cola plant was destroyed also. Our excuse me, our office was destroyed. Basically everything up there was destroyed. Everything that you could imagine that was upland, solar panels, pool solar panels on houses, roofs, you name it, was in the canals, in the canal systems there. And it was just an awful mess. There was no electric for weeks, no power. It was just complete devastation. The feds came in, the military kind of took ownership of the place, and we started working directly for the federal government and the local government to start recovering and cleaning up the canal systems and get stuff out of the water and start rebuilding. Yeah, and we had to bring in a couple office trailers and some big generators. So not only did the government agencies and insurance agencies and other people we were working for and with at the time had a place to do their paperwork and stuff, but we needed office space too. How we prepared, we moored our barges as safe a spot as we could, all of our barges. We pulled out of the water what we could. We called for, filled up every piece of equipment, every fuel tank we owned, and then some. We put materials on standby, truckloads of materials. With all of that preparation before the storm, whether it hit us or not, which that's the negative financial impact on the business, is the what if and all the money spent prior to a pending storm. Now, the positive side, if you get a pending storm either directly or close by, the outcome of that is most of the time you're going to get work out of that, and all the expense that you spent prior to prepping for the storm becomes well spent, and it gets made up. But Hurricane Charlie, there were a couple things that I saw from that storm that I still don't understand to this day. And one of the things is a pond frond. A blade of a pond frond was pierced through a windshield of a car, and there were no cracks in the windshield. So half of that frond was sticking out of the car and half in the car. And I still can't figure out how that happened. It still amazes me today. Anyway, we'll move on. So we survived Hurricane Charlie. Our equipment survived. Our employees survived. Our office, our shop did not survive, but those are all replaceable things, which we did rebuild. But the main thing is you have to secure your equipment at any cost, because that's your livelihood of your business. And if you blow off doing so, you most likely will be out of business if a storm hits and you just blow it off and don't secure your equipment properly and stuff like that. The next storm that impacted me was Hurricane Irma. Hurricane Irma first made landfall in Cudjoe Key, Florida, I believe, and then came up into the Gulf and made its second landfall on Marco Island. So at the time, my business was about 45 miles north of Marco Island, my home base. And the direction that Irma came, we didn't have any storm surge. It actually sucked the water out. But a couple days prior to Irma, we had torrential rainfall. I think it recorded 18 to 24 inches of rain during a 2-day period here. And when Irma came, it sucked all the water out, and what had happened was all the hydrostatic pressure buildup from the torrential rains and the tide going out, the water going out, collapsed miles upon miles and miles of seawall. But prior to Irma, secured the barges in the safest location we could, pulled out of the water what we could, secured our job sites, and stuff like that. Always, when I was young, I'd always remember my father just spending so much time and effort securing equipment and buying materials and supplies for a what if or a maybe. That's what was going on in my mind at the time. And I always thought he overkilled everything. But as I got older, and I realized that he didn't, and it was all for a reason. And so, long story short, preparation before the storm is a must. A hurricane plan is a must. You must have a checklist in your hurricane plan. And you're going to have a hurricane plan regardless if you do work for government agencies or local government or federal government or big corporations. They're going to require you to have a hurricane plan in place anyway. But if you have a hurricane plan in place and you have a checklist in there, you will not forget anything. If you don't have a checklist, I promise you will forget to do something, and that will come back to haunt you if you get impacted from a storm. So Hurricane Irma took tens and tens of miles of seawall, if that's a proper term, of seawall. So we replaced seawall for well over a year of the damage. And I think there were many other contractors around also who were replacing. There wasn't enough contractors around replacing seawalls. It was just, that's how much seawall was down around the region. And so the next hurricane that came through not too long after Irma, a few years I believe, was Hurricane Ian. Now Hurricane Ian probably impacted me the most. Hurricane Ian was forecasted to go to about 250 miles north of us, which whenever hurricanes get in the Gulf, you're concerned. But if they stay off the coast far enough, generally know what to expect. But Irma was forecasted to go, Ian was forecasted to go roughly 250 miles north of us. But it was a storm that was going to eventually move into the Gulf, so I kept my eye on it and started planning. Not prepping, but planning. So, further down, several days passed, and Ian was getting ready to make that northern turn into the Gulf of Mexico, or America. And the forecasters at the last minute said that no, it's going to make a turn and come into the Fort Myers area. And it did. And we did not have much time to prep. We had a lot of projects going on at the time, big projects too. So we scrambled to start securing everything, all the equipment, moored it in places that we thought best, and got everything off the barges that we could, chained down the equipment on the barges, the cranes, and put anchors out along with the spuds that were in all of our barges. Secured our push boats, tugboats, the best we could, and secured our job sites, and hope for the best. And in the meantime, behind the scenes of all that, all the crews were going through the checklist and preparing the equipment. I was on the phone ordering truckloads of material for standby, ordering fuel, materials, just from A to Z, chainsaw blades, cases of tire patch kits, truckloads of piling, truckloads of seawall panels. You just have that on standby, ordering generators, and setting other equipment that we may need on standby at the rental companies. And so all that going on behind the scenes, prepping for a pending storm, which at the time I think we only had about 24 hours to do everything. And by then, there was really no place to go, because the storm was supposed to go north of us, so everybody north of us came south or went to the East Coast. And when I say there was nowhere to go, all the hotel rooms were booked out of town, and just about everywhere. So most of us had to stay and ride out the storm. And there was mandatory evacuations on the barrier islands and stuff where we were. But anyway, long story short, we prepared our equipment the best we could and our job sites, and hope for the best. I wound up staying. Well, I've stayed for every hurricane that's ever impacted us, and unfortunately, I stayed for Ian. And Ian, you hear on the news there's going to be a 20-foot storm surge, and it's been cry wolf many years, so a lot of us Floridians don't really take it serious because they've always been wrong. This time they were right, unfortunately. And I will show you a video of me taking video of the storm during the storm and how the water rose and rose and rose and eventually came into the house. And from the tide, the canal that you may see behind me, to the slab of my house is, I think, 8-9 feet. And that came up and came up and came up and eventually went in the house. And you know, I had the chainsaw, the fire axe, and the ladder down to get the family and the dog into the attic, and if I had to cut us out of the attic to the roof, I was able to. Luckily, we did not have to do that. The water didn't come all the way up to the roof in the house or anything like that. Here, where I'm at, other places it did. But anyway, long story short, all the equipment fared well. Everything else in the Fort Myers area and the barrier islands, like Fort Myers Beach, Sanibel, Pine Island, were destroyed. And I mean destroyed. Hurricane Ian took out major bridges. It took out the Sanibel Causeway. It took out Matlacha Bridge. It took out damn near every dock in our region. Hardly any seawalls fell, but from the storm surge is what devastated everything. It wasn't really the wind or anything, it was a storm surge. And I recall reading or hearing about a 51-foot wave recorded off the coast of Sanibel, you know, during the time of the storm. So from what I know and went through, I believe that wave came in and is what devastated everything, and is why the water rose so much, so fast, and literally just like a tidal wave. It was a tidal wave that just came in and just destroyed everything. The wind was awful also, but that's not what destroyed everything. The wind may have destroyed upland stuff, roofs. I remember the roof over my garage flapping, and I was waiting for the roof to blow off. But other than that, anyway, long story short, survived. The equipment survived. The things that happened during the storm as a business owner, like I remember being on the phone, staring out the back doors, watching boat canopies blow off, boats blow off the lifts, roofs blow off. All that time I was on the phone with one of my biggest clients at the time and their team of people, and they're in a secure place. I'm at my house. We're on the phone as a storm hits us, and we're coming up with a plan for after the storm. So that's some of the stuff as a business owner, what you go through or have to do during these types of storms. And I worrying the whole time, worrying about my employees and their families, because most of your employees, I don't know if I mentioned it, most of your employees are generally live in the same area as your home base. So, you know, and your employees are are your business. And so, I was worried sick about the employees. But after the storm, it's a phone. If you still have cell service, the phones start ringing. We had no power. That's inevitable. There's never any power after the storm. The phone starts ringing from clients, and naturally your employees and stuff, and so you start coming up with a game plan, and you start going out to your projects, checking your projects, assessing the damage, checking your equipment. Luckily, we did not have, I think we had a couple rental pieces of equipment go underwater, and they were well upland too on one of our projects, and we never anticipated the water getting that high. And anyway, luckily all of our equipment, all of our job sites fared, but the area was just absolutely devastated. It took out every marina there was in the Fort Myers area, Pine Island, Sanibel, Fort Myers Beach. Just everything was gone. I've never seen so many boats upland on, in this neighborhood. I'll show you some pictures of massive catamaran sailboats sitting in the yard. Boats hundreds and hundreds of feet up in mangroves. Just sunken boats everywhere, and we spent a lot of time working with some of the towboat companies, recovering boats and loading them on the barges and dropping them off at a staging area around town, and not just Fort Myers, Naples, Punta Gorda. We spent a lot of time doing that. We spent a lot of time, getting marinas cleared out, back up and running as quickly as possible, as much as we could. Like I said, luckily we had, prepared properly and filled up all of our fuel tanks and then some, and pre-ordered materials, had the materials on standby. So I was well prepared on that, and luckily to keep rolling until the material supply, the fuel supply, and the power came back on, which was, I don't know, 10 days, 2 weeks later, something like that. But anyway, so the recovery process after a storm puts a lot of stress on businesses, and if you prepare right, you're able to deal with that. And there's a flood of work that comes into play here. So you may have already had a backlog of projects, 6 months, a year of projects that you already had on the books, and you're following your schedule, and now you have to make a decision whether you want to work or not. And if you do, you have to insert all this work into your schedule. It can be a perfect time if you had thought about planning for growth, taking that next step in your business to grow your business. But you have to do that carefully. But anyway, and that's the positive side of on the financial side of how hurricanes affect marine construction. There is a positive to it. But you have to do that carefully, and you have to be, I think, well experienced in the business industry. So like I said, I don't have a script for this. I was hoping that I could just wing it, and I hope I don't bore you too much. I hope I've answered a lot of questions. Yeah, so those are the three storms that impacted me the most, and the work. Let's talk about the work afterwards again. So, if you can imagine I don't even know how to explain it. We have thousands of docks here in Southwest Florida. Thousands. And you can imagine many of them, majority of them, were completely destroyed or damaged in some way. And there are only a handful of contractors, in every town. And the amount of work and pressure that comes, with you want to go out, you want to help the community, you want to rebuild. In the meantime, if you're a substantial contractor and you've got a good reputation and you've worked with government agencies before you go start rebuilding residential or other, commercial projects, you're going to be working with the government, and when they step in, like FEMA and stuff, to recover, clean up the canals, recover people. Unfortunately, people who didn't listen and get off the barrier islands or out of the lower elevation properties. So you always take care of that first, getting the community somewhat able to function, I guess. And for our case, it's on the water. A lot of the waterways, everything that was on land wound up in the water in many cases, especially around the barrier islands. And a lot of ferrying people over and equipment over to the barrier islands to start rebuilding the barrier islands and opening up the roads, and the tree companies had to be barged over, the power companies had to be barged over to the barrier islands, stuff like that. So you can just see how, from what I've been telling you, and I probably got way off track and talked about stuff that I really shouldn't, that is off topic, but anyway, there's just a lot of stuff that you can see that impacts marine construction business and the industry as a whole, and mentally and physically, like I said before. But when the dust settles, and you get a system down and you start getting in the groove again, everything works out. It takes a long time to rebuild, but you eventually rebuild and the community's almost back to normal again. So I wanted to mention that, generally what hurricanes also do for this industry, and especially business owners of marine construction, hurricanes are some of the most difficult and stressful events in the marine construction industry, or that the industry deals with, but they also reveal a lot of things in the industry and with ownership and the company as a whole. They reveal leadership, they reveal preparation, they reveal teamwork, and most of all, they reveal resilience. And if you have all that in a company, you've got a good company, a solid company going, where everybody's working together, watching over everybody, and taking care of each other. And so I hope I answered your question, the viewer's question who asked me how hurricanes affect. I'd be more than happy to go further in depth on preparation of your equipment, like what we actually do and the tasks that we do and how we do it, how I do it and how I've been taught, and over the 4 generations of my family being in the marine construction. But I'd be more than happy to do that. I also would love to hear your comments, and if you have a topic you'd like to talk to me, I will certainly do my best and probably write a script for it. I do have episode 5 coming out. I kind of inserted this in between 4 and 5. And episode 4 was on barges. It was kind of like an outline, but I go into depth on barges in episode 5. It's a good learning episode, I feel. I worked hard on creating the outline for that. And so be on the lookout for that. But I really appreciate all your comments. Hopefully we won't hurricane season just started here in Florida. Hopefully we won't have any. When I was young and dumb, I always wished for a hurricane, because hurricane meant more work. But as you get older, more experienced, and smarter, you don't want any part of it. So at least I don't. So. But anyway, I really appreciate you listening and watching. And if you like the video, if you like the channel, please like, subscribe. It means a lot to me. And once again, I'm Roy Benton, and I'll see you on the next one.